So, after reading chapter 5 and 7, they were both very interesting chapters, but I focused a little bit more on chapter 7 just because I spent more time thinking about the concepts they talked about in teaching vocabulary and what is important for students to learn, and I was just a little more drawn to that. We spent so much time in other classes and in this class talking about academic language and how to get students to get to that point. And it's something that I've thought about before because in working with students with a lot of diversity and in being a student of color myself, I think the language that we use is very, very important because it's one of the ways that we can level up and just really even the playing field a little bit. And that might not be the most fair, if that makes sense, but in this type of world that we live in, I think in order for us to be successful, we have to make sure that in a way we cover all our bases, if that makes sense. And in no way am I saying that we should continue to perpetuate stereotypes, but we also need people who quote unquote make it, right? We need educators of color, we need politicians of color, we need just to be in every space. And I think what it takes to get into those spaces is just making sure that we are speaking, reading, and understanding the same or higher level as our more affluent, typically white peers, if that makes sense. So I kind of screenshotted this portion about teaching vocabulary just because that to me seems a little daunting. Like, how do I get my students to learn new words, to understand, and not just giving them a vocabulary lesson, having them write out definitions and stuff. So I really liked this part about building on background knowledge. And I think when students can relate to something, they grasp it a little bit better and they're more likely to internalize it and to learn it. And also this concept of using the first language when possible. I've had that experience with students where it's easier for them to understand if I say it in Spanish, and then they're like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And then they'll use that word later on. Just being repetitive, setting aside specific time. So not just putting it on the students to do themselves, but also in class, like making sure we are spending enough time to do that. And just a couple more things. And I just made note of this and how do students learn new words, and it's a gradual process that requires multiple exposures over time. And this process looks like them not knowing and then recognizing when they see it or hear it, and then learning it in a limited context, and then more fully in a variety of context. And for them to really know it, it means they have to have a breadth and depth of the word. So just knowing what it means in different contexts. I think the text used, I can't remember. They used one specific word that it can have like 10 different meanings. And so just giving them the ability to distinguish between that and then, yeah. So what words do students need to know? And I found this to be very informative and very important. So number one is high frequency words, the words that you see in 80 to 90% of texts or in conversations, general academic words like analyze, summarize, examine, theory, and just giving them the language that they need to use to really do those things. We talked about that a lot when we do lesson planning and we have the language functions. So what vocabulary, what words do students need to be able to do these things like analyze and examine? And domain-specific content area words, so those that are in like math or science, are very specific to those. Yeah. And then this idea of BICS versus CALP, so basic interpersonal communication skills versus cognitive academic language proficiency. So not just having students talk to each other about, how their day was, but also incorporating a discussion about text or discussion about an article, or about something you talked about in class, or anything of the sort. And last but not least, that function words are best learned through exposure to natural language use. So just making sure we're using words a lot and relating them to the students, just to help them get a better understanding. So, great chapter.